Well, welcome to this module on connected vehicles and the future of transportation. We're actually going to do two things today at the very highest level. The first is that we're going to spend some time today talking about the basics of what connected vehicles are, some of the background, where we are with the legislation, and then we're going to have a major shift in the second half of the program to talk specifically about what this means to you as public agency officials and what it means to your organizations. So here's the organization that we're going to have for the program today. We're going to talk about four specific things. What are connected and automated vehicles, connected vehicle technologies and applications, a little bit about that. Just a little on policy issues, and then like I say, we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about what does this mean to you. All right, so let's start with what are connected and automated vehicles. Well, at the very highest level, a connected vehicle is simply a vehicle that has some way of wirelessly connecting to something in its environment. It could be a cell tower, it could be a cell phone, it could be a piece of equipment on the roadside, it could be another vehicle. And at the highest level, we see two kinds of connectivity. For example, cell connectivity, where you have a cell connection in the vehicle, perhaps you bring the cell connection with you, with your phone. We are, however, going to spend most of our time talking about dedicated short-range communication, or DSRC. Now, there's some terminology that perhaps you've already heard, but that you need to be familiar with. Vehicle-to-vehicle is V2V connectivity. V2I is vehicle to infrastructure connectivity. V2X is vehicle to kind of everything else. Pedestrians, motorcycles, bicyclists, whatever else is out there that we can connect to. So that's the terminology that you'll hear today. So just to take a moment to talk about cell connectivity, I do think this is very important because cell connection is here today, and you already know that. You have carried-in devices that create a cell connection with what you're doing. You have OEM installed equipment in vehicles today that it creates a connection. What's important about this is that you are aware of it. The other thing that's important is that you are attentive to the way we use the terminology. Depending on which environment that you're in, you'll hear people talking about connected vehicles, and in our world, frequently they mean specifically DSRC. But in other worlds, particularly in the private sector, that connected vehicle might in fact be through cell connection. And they are very different things technologically. The applications that they support are very different. So importantly about cell connection, this is a growing market. You see it everywhere. All you have to do is read the paper and follow the news and what's going on in app development, and you see the level of growth in this industry. The app developers, they're proliferating. If you just look at transportation apps, you'll see hundreds of them. And one of the reasons for that is that this is a high market. There's a lot of money to be made here. So you see the automotive industry trying to shake this out, figure out how do you work with the app developers. Do they develop their own apps? Do they go out and get people to develop them? Ford and General Motors, I think to their credit, opened their dashboards to app developers to have them come and help them provide a lot of creativity. We can learn from that, by the way. General Motors, this model year, began installing 4G LTE connectivity in all of their models, not just the high-end ones, but all of their model cars. This is something that's going to happen just as a matter of course. These are some of the things that you might see where they are involved in transportation applications using cell connectivity. There are probably some companies on here that you're familiar with. Enrix, Waze, for example, we work with them a lot. Enrix and Here, I meant to say. Now, Waze is an app. You might wonder, are you on Waze? If you're not, I would encourage you to try it out just to see the amount of data, the amount of information that they have available to users. It's really astounding. Perhaps some of you are even working with Waze because they're moving out into state DOTs and in cities to try to partner with that. DriveWise is a commercial vehicle application using wireless cellular connectivity. NextBus is one of many transit applications also using cell connectivity. So now if we shift from cellular, and now we're going to spend the rest of our time focusing on dedicated short-range communication, DSRC. DSRC is a different kind of technology. It's based on Wi-Fi. So if you imagine that you take your Wi-Fi router that's in your home and put it in your car. It's actually a Wi-Fi transmitter and it's a Wi-Fi receiver. So it both transmits and receives. That's really hard to do, by the way, transmitting and receives. And it is very useful for safety applications. One of the things that's unique about DSRC is that because unlike cellular, which is one-to-one communication, DSRC is one-to-many. It broadcasts 360 degrees from the receiver. That helps make it quicker and able to support safety applications that we cannot support through a cell connectivity. And that's why we have been so interested in it. So let's just look a little bit about the technology behind it and why it's important. Why would we care? And it is a very low latency broadcast connection uniquely suited for imminent crash warnings. We cannot do what DSRC does through cell connectivity. It has had a lot of research. I'll share a little bit about that with you. And the development and the deployment is moving forward, which is why it is so relevant to you today. This is a quote from NHTSA. And I assume that you know NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Their role is to regulate safety on the automotive fleet. So NHTSA, when they examined DSRC's capabilities and we studied it, they said V2V technology can address a large majority of crashes involving 2 or more motor vehicles. You might have heard a quote that DSRC can address 80% of crashes. That is actually a misquote. And so I want to make sure that we get it right and that you understand. So V2V technology, vehicle to vehicle, the real quote is it can address up to 80% of non-impaired crash types, okay? Not 80% of crashes. And it's the crash types that are implicated by DSRC are vehicle-to-vehicle crashes. It does not address run-off-the-road single vehicle crashes unless there's an infrastructure component. But NHTSA is looking specifically at V2V connectivity, not V2I. But tremendous, tremendous potential here for crash reductions and saving lives. So let's shift to understand a little bit about how this works. So again, you've got that Wi-Fi router, transmitter, and receiver on board the vehicle. So that equipment takes data off of the vehicle, and some of the data elements are what you actually see on the slide. It takes the data off of the vehicle and it transmits it 10 times a second, 360 degrees around the vehicle. Now, it uses dedicated spectrum at 5.9 gigahertz that was allocated by the FCC. It is important to understand that that spectrum is under a great demand today by the wireless industry. FCC is actually working with US DOT and the auto manufacturers right now to understand if that spectrum can be shared. There's testing that's going to go on, so it's still a work in progress. But it does use dedicated spectrum. And again, it's taking that data and it's called the basic safety message. And I actually think that's important for you to remember, the basic safety message. It's a set of data that takes it off the vehicle, transmits it 10 times a second. Importantly, there has to be another vehicle similarly equipped to use the message. So one transmits, the other vehicle receives. So one transmits and the other vehicle receives. The receiving vehicle takes that data. There are algorithms on board the vehicle that process that data and then tell you if you are in an imminent crash situation through warnings inside the vehicle. So you have to have both vehicles equipped, sending and receiving, for the technology to work. Now, when in the early years, there was this idea that we were going to have to instrument all of the roads in the country for this to work. That is in fact not true. V2V, vehicle-to-vehicle communication, does not require a vast network of infrastructure, except special infrastructure to support a security network, which I'll explain in just a few minutes. So some of the testing behind V2V. You can imagine that if you are NHTSA, right? If you're NHTSA and you're responsible for regulating safety equipment on a vehicle, you take that responsibility very seriously, and having worked with them for years, they take that responsibility very seriously. If you're going to make that kind of decision, you need data, information, research to understand how effective is it effective before you start a regulatory process. So that's what we did. We worked with NHTSA through my old office, and we set up the safety pilot in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It is actually still in operation today. Its work was expanded, so they're still doing tests in Ann Arbor today. The applications that you see on the screen are the 6 applications that were initially tested up in Ann Arbor. We had a fleet of vehicles that were equipped with the technology. They shared the data, and we tested to see how or if it actually decreased crashes and how the drivers experienced the warning system. We set up a security network as a part of that test. The results were obviously very positive. They were combined with some analytical analysis that was done, and the combination of the two is what gave NHTSA the information to say, yes, this is in fact very valuable, and we want to move toward a regulatory approach. So let's look at that regulatory approach. There are a couple of resources that are out there that are important. Now, let me just do a really quick summary of what a regulatory process looks like at the federal government level so that you can understand where we are in this process today. And it is moving relatively quickly for the government. So when you do a regulatory process in the government, it has to be very transparent, it has to be very open, everyone has to have an opportunity to comment on it. What we would do is we would issue an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking. So they're going to propose a rule, they provide a notice of it, but in some cases, this being one, it's so complex, they will actually do an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking. So in August of 2014, that's exactly what NHTSA did. They published an ANPRM. You can still find it out there. I have a copy of it with me. And they actually asked questions of the community about what it would be like to deploy this V2V technology. The agency has to take all the comments that come in, they have to address all the comments. They have done that. The other thing that they released at the same time was a very large document, it's over 300 pages of a report called the V2V Communications Readiness of V2V Technology for Application Report. It summarized where they are with all their research. It identified all the additional research that's going to be necessary. It's quite extensive. There's quite a lot yet to be done. But it's got also a lot of information that's very useful. So both of those documents were released in August of 2014. There has been a lot of pressure on this technology because of its potential. Consequently, Secretary Fox announced that he has an intention to accelerate the rulemaking process. Normally, NHTSA would have published a notice of proposed rulemaking as the next step, sometime in 2016. He has accelerated that so that they have an NPRM, Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, that they are evaluating internally now, lots of hoops you have to go through, in order to publish it for public comment. So expect that to come out in early 2016, which is an accelerated schedule for USDOT. Once again, it will publish the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking will actually be the proposed regulatory language. Everyone can comment on it. They are required to address all those comments before they would publish a final rule. Now, in NHTSA's case, when they do a final rule, just imagine, all the automotive manufacturers have to change their manufacturing process. This is a big deal. So they give several years typically to phase in the new requirements. So we'll look at a timeline in just a minute so you have a feel for what we might be looking for in terms of timing. Now, there are other things that are going on as well. In the fall of 2015, FHWA and the Joint Program Office released the first wave of the Connected Vehicle pilot deployments. The 3 that were selected were Tampa, New York City, and Wyoming. Also, FHWA is very engaged in V2I, Vehicle to Infrastructure applications. They released a draft deployment guidance document earlier this year. Also, a copy of that, you can find it still on the internet. It is now internal to the agency, under internal review, again, a lot of hoops they have to jump through, and expect it to be released as official guidance for your use sometime in 2016. That will be a very important document for you to know about. So that's kind of where we are with a lot of these steps. So this is what the timeline looks like. This is important because it impacts what you might want to do with this technology. So again, we had the safety pilot back in 2013. We had a decision by NHTSA in early 2014. They were going to pursue regulation. They've released an ANPRM. We expect the NPRM in early 2016. Again, they've got to do all the comments. It's going to take a while. Maybe they'll get out a final rule in about 2017, would be my guess. Let's say it has a few years of phase-in period. So now you're at 2020. When the technology will be required on new vehicles. NHTSA says, left to its own devices, that it will take about 37 years for a full fleet turnover, all right, because it's only applicable to new vehicles. Many of us, myself included, believe that once NHTSA actually goes through the regulatory process, you'll begin to see creative entrepreneurs and equipment manufacturers who will develop a retrofit opportunity. I think it will go faster than 37 years. All right, I'm just going to very briefly mention automated vehicles. This is a huge topic worthy of actually a lot more thought, but I'm just going to touch on it so we just have it in the mix. So again, NHTSA, about in 2012, 2013, they released a preliminary statement of policy about autonomous vehicles. It was intended to provide guidance to state DOTs about any legislation you might be considering. It is still relevant for that. The thing that most people remember about it, though, is it created this terminology around autonomous vehicles, so that now you'll hear people talk about level 0 to 4 autonomous vehicles. Level 0 being vehicles that have no autonomy. Level 4 being fully self-driving vehicles, like you would see with the Google car, where there's no steering wheel, all of that. And the levels in between indicate varying levels of automated features inside the vehicle. This is moving at light speed. This is entirely driven by the private sector at this point. It does not require connectivity. So they're doing this separate from the connected vehicle work. This is some of what we see right now, and it actually moves very quickly. You know, you already have level 2 for sure on the market. You're seeing level 3, self-parking vehicles, vehicles that can move in traffic and do like basically automated cruise control. So this is moving very quickly. The reason, there's a lot of money to be made here. So and you're seeing very atypical players in this market, Apple, Google, all of these that are very interested in this market. But I'm not going to go into that any further, but this is absolutely worthy of your attention. I just want to touch on policy issues. I'm not going to go into this a lot. First of all is privacy. This is one of the first things that comes up every time, right? Everyone's concerned about the privacy. What's important for you to understand is that this system, this connected vehicle system, was designed from the ground up to protect privacy. So for example, when you take the data off the vehicle and it's sending it 10 times a second out into the atmosphere, there's not any identifying information in that data. There's no VIN number as a part of that data set. So we don't know who you are driving around sending that information. We'll talk a little bit more about it when we talk about the security network. Now there is one thing where we do have to know something about you. So if something goes wrong with your vehicle and you're not transmitting correctly, we have to be able to notify you. That's through the security network. Data ownership is a thing that's still under discussion, and we'll see how this plays out. At this point, there are no data ownership restrictions. However, it's my belief that once we get a little closer to implementation and this becomes more known about, then you might see much more engagement around data ownership issues. So for example, the basic safety message is this data about this big. There's a basic safety message part 2 that's about data about that big. And that's transmitted less frequently. But there's a lot more data on a vehicle that can now be transmitted. Who owns it? Who gets it? Who has access? Those are all very important issues that are still to be worked out. USDOT had to assess its authority around this. It's pretty clear at this point, and it's fairly clear that they have the authority to regulate all this kind of equipment into the vehicle fleet, and they believe they have the authority to cause a safety security system to come into being. FHWA is very clear on their authority. They do not have the authority to regulate infrastructure to you. It is a choice that you will make, and it's a very important choice for you to think about, and how do you choose to go about that. The guidance document that they're issuing will have a lot of information that will support that, and some other documents as well. Driver distraction, that was a really huge thing early on with Secretary LaHood. It's still a big thing. NHTSA has distraction guidelines. So for example, the way it works is, say the warning is going to come into the vehicle to you, the driver. The automotive manufacturer has choice about how they choose to send that warning to you, the driver. So for example, how Hyundai chooses to warn you is likely very different than the way Mercedes will choose to warn you. In the test vehicles, some of the basic models just have something that flashes on the dashboard or in the rearview mirrors. In the case of Mercedes, they have lights that would go around, so they're directional. Some of them have seats that vibrate, also directional, to tell you which direction the threat is coming from. So that's available to them for differentiation for their product within a set of guidelines that NHTSA sets up. Spectrum I've already mentioned to you. This is something that's still being looked at because there is so much demand for wireless spectrum, and everyone's just worried that nothing interferes with the ability for this system to provide safety warnings. So let's talk about the security system. It's the Security Credential Management System. This is a highly, highly complex system, and I am not able to give you all the details of it, and actually I don't think you want to know, nor do you need to know them. What I do think you need to know is that it exists and what role you might be playing in it. So the best way that I know to describe this security credential management system is to have you literally feel what it's like. So just imagine for a moment that I am a Ford. So I'm a Ford vehicle. Now imagine that you are, let's pick something good, Ferrari. So you're going to be a Ferrari. So now we're working in a V2V network. So I'm in a situation as my Ford is that I'm receiving the data from that Ferrari. So it's coming at me, and I'm receiving it. Now, I have no idea how they manufacture that equipment. I have no idea what kind of quality control there is. I don't know anything about how that was managed on the Ferrari end. But I, as a Ford, am now in a situation where I have to trust that data coming to me, process it, and decide to give my customer a crash warning. Do you sense how hard that is? It is because of this cooperative nature that we believe in the government that this system would never come into being was it not for federal government role. Because they actually have no way of working together in that kind of cooperation to figure all of that out. So the only way this works is that me as a Ford, and by the way as the Ferrari, we have to work in a trusted network. So there's some way that I know that that Ferrari's message is fine, and I can trust it. So the way that it works at a very high level is called a public key infrastructure system. Is that each of us receive wireless certificates. And as long as I have a valid certificate, then my message can be heard by the Ferrari. As long as the Ferrari has a valid certificate, I am able to hear that message and act on it. The certificate changes very frequently, so you can't track the certificates. It's part of the privacy design. There's a different part of the security network that is enabled to be able to contact you to say, you know what, something's gone wrong with your Ferrari. Sorry, but there's something wrong with the message, and it's not either correct, we fear something's happened with your system, perhaps something's hacked into it, but something's wrong. And so your certificate is revoked, and that way I no longer hear it. A different part, firewalled off, a different part of the security network is able to contact you, the driver, to say, you need to take your car in for service, there's something wrong with your system, and bring it back into the trusted network. NHTSA, because this is so complex, NHTSA released an RFI, Request for Information, back in 2014 to ask for input about this system and ask, how do you think we would set this up? How would we govern it? How would we run it? Who's going to pay for it? Because they're really clear it's not the government. So there needs to be some private entity that comes into being to run the security network. This is hands down the most complex piece of connected vehicle work. So this is kind of what it would look like. Right? You have that entity, whatever it is, that's providing communication support to all the vehicles that are communicating with each other. Here's why you care. Let's say you decide you want to play on the infrastructure side. So you want your traffic signal to be saying signal phase and timing, signal phase and timing, signal phase and timing. You too have to be trusted. You too have to be part of that network so that they know somebody hadn't hacked into your traffic signal. They need to know that something's going to work and that they can trust that equipment. We don't know how that would work. We don't have any idea what it means to you specifically. All I want you to know now is just to pay attention to it. Know to ask about it. It is important, and it's probably going to be part of the entry to be able to play in this game. All right, so let's shift gears. So we've talked a lot about kind of where we are legislatively, kind of what the technology does and how it works. Now let's look at, what does this mean to you? What does it mean to you today? What does it mean to you in the near future? Now, there are a lot of opportunities here, a lot of them around the data. Just think about the amount of data that's going to be flying around, even if you're only dealing with the basic safety message part 1, which is the smallest amount. What does that data mean to you in your world in transportation? So what we're going to focus on first is, what does it mean today? And it's still a little crystal ball gazing, but I'm going to give you my best assessment. Now, if you look at several opportunities that you have and several functions that you serve, I've highlighted 4 of them. The first is about capturing data. You do that. Another is about procuring data. You probably do that. Another is about, how do you be a participant in all of this ecosystem that's developing? And then you also provide traveler information. So let's look at what is implicated in each of these 4 areas for you today, as well as then what it looks like maybe 5 to 10 years out. So this is kind of what we see in terms of the cell and the DSRC connection. You do need to be aware cell connection is right here, right now. You can take advantage of it for purchasing data. A lot of data that's out there. It's important to be a participant. You can look at how that's working now. We'll talk a little bit more about that for DSRC. I think that's very important. So there's a lot of opportunity today that is worthy of your time. So let's look at the capture data side. One thing that I believe that's worthy of your effort today is to start looking at your data picture. What data do you have? Signal data, freeway data, incident data, weather data, bridge height data, curvature data. What information, what data do you have right now? How are you using the data that you have right now? What do you need it for? What function are you serving with that data? Because keep in mind, you're about to enter a world where all this shifts. And if you don't understand what you need right now and for what, you're going to have different sources of data, and you're going to need to know how this is relevant to you and can it work for you. So what information do you have? What information would you like to have? And how does it impact what you're capturing today? Because you can do data capture through traditional methods, you've got Bluetooth, but now we're entering a world of connected vehicle data. Procuring data. Probably if I were to ask you, many of you would already be procuring data from perhaps INRIX, from here, from Waze. Again, Waze is working with cities and states today, and I believe there are several here today who are already working with Waze in the vast amount of data that they have. This is all cell data. This is here today, right now. FHWA has made available the National Performance Management Research Data Set. I think I got that right. The NPMRDS data set. It is based on HERE data. You can get that to look at it, to play with it. It's historical data. It's provided monthly, as I understand. So if you're not already using that, this is a great way to start looking at what kind of data you can get, and it's free. Great opportunity. That's something you absolutely ought to be doing today. So when you look at whether you want to purchase data or go get it yourself, because we've always kind of been a do-it-yourself sort of industry, you have to evaluate what are the cost trade-offs. What's the cost of buying it versus the cost of installing and maintaining and keeping everything up, installation and maintenance cost. So it's a trade-off. And I believe that that trade-off is going to be even more important in the coming years. Today, I believe you can be a participant. Now, how do you be a participant? One of the ways is by sharing all that data that you have. There are app developers out there, there are businesses out there that can use that data to provide information to all the travelers that we serve. Think about the data that you have that you can release. Transit data has been made available for a long time. That's one of the reasons that right now there's a proliferation of transit apps. You can very easily get real-time information about transit because the data's out there. How can you enable that? Some cities are releasing their signal phase and timing information. How can you enable that? Again, app developers take that and they provide a service to the people that we serve. Some cities, New York City being an example, have done app development contests. Here's the data. You guys go be creative, see what you can come up with, and they create these amazing apps that make transportation and travel easier in those cities. It's a way to be part of this evolution and be right in the middle of it and take advantage of it when we probably don't have the time or money or the resources to do really creative, crazy apps. It's a way to participate. As public agencies, we always have to ask, is it serving the public interest? And that's the question. Because it's really easy to get caught up in the legal issues about the data. But the bottom line question is, are we serving the public that we're here to serve? Today, another thing that I believe that you can do is to start thinking about how you would use DSRC applications in your location. That might look like identifying high crash intersections. So you have vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure communicating with your traffic signals. High crash intersections. Do you have planned signal upgrades already in your tip? Great time to be thinking about adding a little bit of money to enable your ability to include DSRC equipment in those planned signal upgrades. Do you have corridors where all of that data coming from the vehicles could really help with your operation of that corridor? Do you have locations where DSRC might fit a unique need? For example, if you have a curve where you continue to have people running off that curve, if you have DSRC there distributing curvature information, it's very high likelihood that you would see people take advantage of that and provide warnings about the curvature. A couple of documents for your reference that are out today. The AASHTO Infrastructure Footprint Analysis is available today. FHWA's Vehicle to Infrastructure Guidance has been out. Right now it is not out in an official way. It will be coming out again as official guidance in the near future. That again are two great resources for you as you think about how would you plan for DSRC. It is absolutely not too early. Another way that you can be a leader in this space and prepare, because it's coming, there are affiliated testbeds. If you are so interested and so inclined, you can work with the affiliated testbed program, set up testbeds in your location. It's a good time to start updating your regional ITS architecture to include connected vehicles. There are resources available to you for that as well. If you look at the ITS Joint Program Office website, you have a connected vehicle reference implementation architecture. There's going to be training courses around this as well to update your regional architecture for connected vehicles. There is a Connected Vehicle Deployment Coalition. This is a coalition by AASHTO, ITE, and ITS America. Meetings are free. People coming together to talk about how would you go about implementing the infrastructure side of connected vehicles. There is Connected Vehicles Pilot Deployment Program. I already mentioned Wave 1 was just announced. You see the winners there, Wyoming, New York City, and Tampa. The next wave is expected to be released in terms of an RFP in 2017. We're almost in 2016 already. Now would be a great time to start positioning yourself to be a player in that 2017 wave. All of this is what you can do today. Today. Once again, it is not too early. Traveler information. You provide traveler information right now. 511 centers, right? Your state DOTs, your cities are very likely active on social media. This is going to change, particularly 511. In a world where information is out there in the form of apps, what does that mean to your 511 system? It might be a good idea to start thinking about that. What does this mean to our 511 system? What is our role in this when everyone is providing traveler information? It's likely going to shift what we do in the public sector around things like 511. All right, that's today. Let's look at what you might do a little bit in the future. Not forever in the future. We're going to look maybe 5, 10 years out. And in our world, that's pretty quick. You're doing plans right now in that time frame and longer. It's very relevant to what's going on. If you have not engaged with your planning community, this is a really good time to start because it's going to change a lot, particularly when you combine connected vehicles with autonomous vehicles. It's a huge shift. So let's just think. Let's fast forward 5, 10 years out. What do we see? In the area of connected vehicles, cell connectivity is going to be pervasive. Absolutely, your car is going to have cell connection. You're going to have a lot of data. It's going to be coming through your phone. A lot of information will be out there. DSRC, assuming NHTSA moves forward with regulation, which is likely, will be in the very early stages of the DSRC equipment coming out on the vehicle fleet. We'll be seeing if we've got aftermarket coming into play. So we're going to have very early stages of DSRC equipment. Not a bad time for you all to be there with the infrastructure side. Autonomous vehicles, wow, depends on who you want to believe. Google would tell us that they're going to be here in 5 years. Most people that I talk to think it's going to be a little longer than that. The thing I would suggest to you is to listen really closely to what you hear in the media. The question is not, is the technology going to be here? Is it available for sale? Is it operational on all types of facilities? You can imagine that to drive on a freeway, you have many less things to worry about. If you're on a surface street, on a major arterial, now you've got buses and trucks and pedestrians and bicyclists and Fluffy and Fido and soccer balls. So there's a lot more to be attended to in some of those areas. So listen carefully when you listen to people talk about the time horizon. But without doubt, in 5 or 10 years, it's going to be a pretty big impact in what we do. We should be planning for this now. So capturing data. In 5 to 10 years, I believe that U.S. public agencies may still be capturing some data. There is likely very specialized data that you will need. Now, I live here in Maryland. We have a Bay Bridge. They capture wind velocity because sometimes we have to close the bridge. That's very specialized data. The vehicle is unlikely to give you wind velocity. So there's still going to be some needs to capture specialized data. What is it? It's a good time to think about what are those specialized needs that none of this other stuff is going to provide. How does DSRC data impact you? One caveat. One of the things to watch for is what are the specific data elements inside the basic safety message. NHTSA can only require the data elements that are needed to support the safety applications. You probably need other data for operational applications. Is that going to be available? We don't know. NHTSA can't regulate that. They have no authority over that. So you need to know inside the basic safety message. So once again, you're going to be in a situation of balancing the cost benefit between buying some of this data from whomever it is that's selling it, because we don't know, I think it's going to change, and then procuring it yourself. Procuring data, I think this is going to be a much bigger part of your world in 5 to 10 years. There's just going to be so much data out there. Data analytics, I also believe will be a much bigger part of your world. It is no small thing to take the amount of data that's going to be flying around and convert it to usable information. It is a science and it is an art. If you're not already looking at data analytics packages, it'd be a good thing to start looking at as well. Traveler information, as I just mentioned, in this time frame, 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a lot of question about what are you doing with 511? You know, everybody's going to have this data. It's going to be so pervasive. What are you doing funding 511? But it's not a simple question. The public sector, we have a unique role to serve. We are the providers of equal information. We are the providers of social justice. We want things to be fair to everyone. Maybe not everybody has the sleekest, newest kind of piece of information and piece of equipment that gives all the information. I don't think it's a slam dunk that we're just going to close 511 down and go away. I think it's going to take a lot of thought about what our role is in the public sector and how do you complement what's going on in the private sector. Being a participant in 5 to 10 years, if you're not positioning yourself right now, my worry is that's just going to pass you right by. And anything that you need out of this process, you're not going to get it because now you're going to be negotiating with really big players. I think it's important to look at what you need now. How can you connect into this ecosystem and be sharing information in order to get information? Again, opening up your data. Who's going to be the first open data state? Who's going to be the first one to say, yeah, I got work zone information, I got bridge height information, I got traffic signal information. I'm going to put it out there in order to enable us to be part of all of this that's going on and participate in it. It may generate new partnering opportunities. Now, I'm frankly not quite smart enough to figure this out. But I would suggest to you that you need to keep your eyes and ears open for some new opportunities. I believe that in the atmosphere of all this data, there are going to be opportunities for partnering with people we never dreamed about. People who would love to have some of that data, have access to your right-of-way to capture that information coming off those vehicles, that can monetize that data. Maybe there's going to be somebody that's going to walk in your door and say, listen, I'm going to operate your light system, I'm going to operate your traffic signal system, I'm going to operate all of this. Handle it. We'll handle it if we can have access to this information in your right-of-way. I don't know, but something's going to break free here. There's just too much money at stake, and you need to know how are you going to play. How are you going to play in it? Also, again, this is all assuming that NHTSA is going to regulate DSRC equipment. Have you chosen to install it? What choice are you going to make around this? It's your choice. FHWA is not going to tell you to do it. What have you chosen? What have you chosen around this? Again, good time to think about high crash intersections, corridors needing a lot of data? What are some of the considerations of installing DSRC? Right now, you'd own it. You'd have to pay for it. You'd have to maintain it. Might not be that way in the future. Don't know. But now's a really good time to start thinking about it because you're going to be right in the middle of it 5 to 10 years from now. Again, automated vehicles. We don't know. Big crystal ball gazing here. But what we do know is that it's coming fast. It's coming fast. Now just think for a moment about taking automated self-driving vehicles and merging them with connected vehicles. So now we have connected automated vehicles is what US DOT is working on and very interested in. So now think about merging that with the sharing economy. Imagine self-driving Uber. So now instead of all of us having multiple cars in our driveway, we just have transportation as a service. It's not a car, it's a service. I'm just going to call it up on my app, and whatever kind of transportation I need in that moment at that time shows up for me. I'm sharing it with everybody here in this room. We don't need to have as many cars. We for sure do not need to have as much parking spaces. I believe that combination is going to completely transform urban planning. If you think about the work that you're doing with your planning department right now, long-range plans, 20 years in a long-range plan, identifying investments that have 20, 30, 40-year life, how are they thinking about this implication in the transportation plans? This is a really good time to make sure that you are pulling in your planning department and working together to vision what this might look like and to create some flexibility in that planning process so you can adapt. Because the only thing that we know for sure is that this is rapidly changing and you're going to need to adapt to this on the fly. Not just put it in the plan and we're good to go. That's gone. How can you play in this arena? Another area that I believe personally that we've not capitalized on enough. Some of those autonomous vehicles would really like to follow the striping. They'd really like to be able to consistently read the road signs. How are we working with them? Are we able to say, look, we're going to identify certain corridors and they're going to be autonomous friendly. We're going to make sure that the striping is good. We're going to make sure that the signs work and they're all there where you can read them. We've not done anything with that. The automotive industry assumes that they're working in an environment just like what they see today and that they can't count on those things. So they're designing their equipment to be able to accommodate the environment that we see. How can we help in that and be a partner? If it was my perfect world, I created your to-do list. Here's the to-do list that I would offer to you for your consideration. First of all, look at your data. Look at your data sources, look at your data needs. What are you using? What do you have? Look at your data procurement options. How are you taking advantage of the data that's out there today? Are you using it to the maximum that it's available? Can you become an open data provider? What information do you have that you can start sharing out there to enable more applications to be part of that ecosystem? Study DSRC opportunities, some of those intersections, intensive corridors, data budgeting for traffic signal system upgrades for this technology. Look at FHWA's guidance document when it comes out. Look at the draft right now. These are things that you can do right now on your to-do list. Also on the to-do list is staying in the game. This is moving so fast, it's going to change our world. Are you updating your ITS regional architecture using that connected vehicle reference implementation architecture? Are you part of the connected vehicle pool fund study? Are you participating in the vehicle to infrastructure deployment coalition through AASHTO? Are you choosing to be an affiliated test bed? Do you want to get your feet wet and try out a test bed? Are you using the FHWA MPMRDS data set? We have to fix that acronym. And are you interested in playing in the connected vehicle pilots? That's going to be coming up in 2017. These are all things that you can do right now to stay in the game and increase your participation in these activities to prepare you for the future. Here's what you should be watching for. Absolutely watch for NHTSA's NPRM. It should be coming out sometime in early 2016. When we see it, you need to look at the data content. What data is in the basic safety message, and does it meet the data needs that you just identified? What can you do with it? Watch for the security requirements for participating in the security network. What is it going to mean to you as a public agency? We already have the AASHTO footprint analysis that's available. Watch for FHWA's release of the VITA-I implementation, and then absolutely watch the level of evolution of autonomous and self-driving vehicles. It's going to happen very quickly, but the good news is you're just going to see it in the papers. It's going to be all over the place. So what we've talked about today is we've talked about what are connected and automated vehicles. We've looked at some of the applications, how the technology works, the regulatory framework and the timeline. We've looked at a few of the policy issues, but mostly we've talked about why it matters to you and what you can be doing right now to be a participant and to be prepared. This is a revolution unlike anything we've ever seen before, and we need to be playing in the game. Thanks so much for participating today.